Well, I have with me a very special guest today, considering that crude is down. There is some optimism on the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit front. We can concentrate on the other domestic issue that we have had, the debt problem. I have with me the Department of Economic Affairs Secretary, Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg. Mr. Garg, thank you very much, and thank you for dropping in at a very opportune moment and giving us a chance.
Thank you.
Well, like I was saying, the external issue seems a little less of a worry at the moment, but the domestic debt market has kind of frozen up. There is a bit of illiquidity. Is the government worried about it? What is your assessment of the debt market?
Why should we only be discussing the issues which worry you? You just mentioned very rightly, the crude is back below 80, very much below 80, somewhere near 76, 77. The rupee is also stabilizing, it's below the peak, and so these factors, one month back, or the oil was a much bigger worry for everyone. We had said, we thought that once the Iranian question gets resolved more or less, then there would be more stability coming. Now you find reports coming that by the time we come in January, there might actually be surplus in the oil market, and that's probably what is driving. So what I wanted to say is that there are temporary problems. Those should be seen in that context rather than as major structural bigger problem. That is where, to my mind, also this debt market issue for some period of time, for some days, if not weeks at most, there was large-scale redemptions in mutual funds. There was some bit of uncertainty about the health of some of the companies in the NBFCs, etc. But this is relatively small. It's not that big, that systemic. And therefore, the reaction which came, to my mind, was also a bit of an overreaction. As we go along, in next few days, when the liquidity, it's already improved quite a lot. It's not that it's not. At certain end, the shorter end, the CPs, etc., they might be, but even there we are seeing things improving. But for the longer end, there is no liquidity problem. So I think this will also weather away.
Well, when you speak to debt market participants, debt dealers, or to housing finance companies who have financed, the entire portfolio is not retail, they have financed builders, and a few days back one of the builder companies was downgraded, and that created a huge ripple. Friday and Monday we saw stocks and debt markets react very negatively to it. So that's why I'm asking you, is that a concern? Are you thinking in terms of a line of credit to mutual funds? Any such extraordinary short-term measures?
So that's what one or two companies can always be weak companies. But what worries me more is the overreaction which comes up when some of these isolated events happen. Our NBFCs, our HFCs are by and large very sound.
Okay.
Most of them are in very good health. There would always be one or two companies which will be relatively weak. I'm told the assets in their portfolio of loans is very sound, very good. The quality assets are there. And that is when I think overreaction can create problem. If we have a mature reactions, then probably the things wouldn't be as much of a problem.
So it's the nature of markets to react the way they react.
That's what the problem is. Even on rupee, oil, what we saw was more of an overreaction. That's not. So if we base ourselves on more of fundamentals rather than on temporary things, would be much better. Here on the liquidity, the question which you had, SBI came up with that facility, which works both ways very well. For SBI, you can pick up the good quality assets. For the company which is facing some liquidity problems, you can get the liquidity back. Let's remember, fundamentally our savings and financialization is secure. That's not gone away anywhere. and therefore money will keep on flowing into instruments. Maybe in place of X instrument, it will go to Y instrument.
Yeah, it's going now from debt funds to probably bank
somewhere.
deposits.
And therefore, that realignment of assets and liabilities might take place. Of funding,
in the context of that one real estate, one builder downgrade, we had a lot of experts talking to us, and they were worried about some, say, 50,000 crore of loans. I mean, the total exposure, they said, for under construction is about 5 lakh crore. Of that, they are worried about 50,000 and maybe 15,000 crore more immediately. Are there any numbers you are working with? Are these, stressed assets? If they default, then, there is a contagion. They default, and therefore the housing finance or the NBFC defaults on its CPs. This is not a scenario at all, you think?
No, you have to be conscious of it. You can't. If the NBFCs have redemptions coming up in their way until, let us say, March of about 2 lakh crores, those would need to be refinanced. One has to be, likewise, if some builders have, so those, one has to be conscious about it.
The CP of only NBFCs for October was about 80,000 crore, and for November it's about 77,000 crore. Only commercial paper for issued by NBFCs and HFCs. Now, SBI securitization is good, but securitization typically takes time. So that's why I guess the market is worried.
It's not exactly securitization, it's buying those assets.
Of loans,
right?
Yes.
So you're not issuing securities, you're buying those assets. That's one way of making your liquidity and making your asset liability management. That can happen. So if the NBFCs have the short-term exposure in the form of CPs or debentures which are maturing, if they can be refinanced by way of longer term, and they have assets on the longer term side, then it should be possible to make things match.
Yeah, but are you sure? Because a lot of banks have hit their limit, we were told. If you looked at the Reserve Bank's data on sectoral, composition of bank loans, then almost from last April to this April, there has been a big jump, about 27% jump in loans to NBFCs. Thereafter, it has kind of plateaued, and my sense is bankers say that many of them have hit limits. And they're also worried that what is the quality of the loans they are buying. I'm just asking you if the government and the finance ministry worries that there could be a contagion, a domino effect.
So we are conscious of it. We are aware of it. I wouldn't say whether we're worried, because worry will not resolve the issues.
Okay, you're conscious.
We'll need to find solutions.
Is there
for
some plan B or something?
So you heard the Reserve Bank also coming out, relaxing single exposure on the NBFCs, also permitting them to hold assets against the... so there are various ways in which the liquidity problems, which is temporary. I don't believe this is lasting longer. It must be for few weeks at best. So there are ways in which those would be resolved, and there are steps being taken.
I believe that was a part of the discussion that you must have had with the Reserve Bank at the board meeting yesterday. Was there any list of steps that you all...
I'm not supposed to discuss what, what happened yesterday and what subject, but basically it was the board meeting.
Okay. What about prompt corrective action banks? Because we were told that, the government would want some of those rules relaxed, whereas from the Reserve Bank, the feeling was that those are banks which still have very high NPAs, and therefore they wouldn't want them to, buy assets of below a particular quality, even if it means a problem in the debt market. Is that something on which you have an idea?
On the PCA front, the discussion is RBI has a certain framework about the PCA, right? That framework is not in line with the international. It's more conservative than anywhere else, right? So the point of discussion is whether that kind of rigorous or over-rigorous framework is required or not. It's not a question of relaxation. From the global standards.
What aspect of the
I wouldn't get into that specifically, but on broader principles issue, the issue is this: no Government is not asking for any relaxation. Government is asking for discussion on an appropriate framework, which is in line with global best practice. Right. So sometimes if
global banks don't have 15%, 25% NPAs that we are currently faced with. 10 of those banks.
Global systems have the framework for prompt corrective action when banks have a certain kind of capital problem, right? And that is where ultimately everything boils down to.
Yes, it boils down to how much capital they have.
That's where it is. So that is the trigger, that is the benchmark, that is the norm which is used internationally. We use many more.
Yes, we use NPA as well.
So the additional things which are being used as a kind of framework here, it's not relaxation. It is
the
appropriate.
Filters. No, it's just that NPA numbers were so big that they must have been included.
Over-medication is also not a great idea to...
So there were 3 filters that the Reserve Bank had given. The CRAR, capital, as you said, capital adequacy versus the risk weights of assets, the NPA threshold, and then there was return on assets. If they are negative for 3 years, then they go into PCA. So your point of discussion was the NPA filter should not be there?
I will not get into the specifics, but on the broader plane, this is what the point of discussion.
But what about capital, sir? Since capital is an obvious threshold, if the government were to capitalize, then automatically banks will start lending a little more. Is that being brought forward?
See, the government has committed. Last year we announced this program of 2.11 lakh crore, and that was that everybody would have, every bank would have the normative capital which is required, and government is providing that. Even the PCA banks today don't have lesser than what is required as the regulatory capital. So on the capital, there is no demand.
It takes care of the risk weighted assets, but growth capital is not there.
Correct.
So if that can be advanced.
So that is where we would like these banks also to lend and to provide them growth capital. Right.
No, for growth, for extra lending, they may need capital immediately. Course. So is that coming? Are you planning the capital infusion?
But they should be able to lend. Right, according to the framework.
According to the framework, they can lend above BBB and above A.
So you need the growth capital when you are able to lend, right? So
No, some of the bankers gave me to understand they can lend A and above. It's not that they are prevented from lending.
Again, this is a matter of detail, but that's broader question is this: you can provide growth capital if you are able to lend.
So you want some of the filters of return on assets or something changed.
Let us see.
You think y'all could reach an agreement? Should we expect some announcements?
It's a matter of discussion.
Still a matter of discussion. Any discussion on providing a line of credit to mutual funds? We had done that in 2013 and 2008. Is that also something?
We are under discussion with them.